welcome everybody. And if you've not been to one of these gigs before, these conversations that matter, we do them a little differently than your average webinar where you have just talking heads up front and you might be able to ask a question through the official questioning strategy that may or may not get answered or whatever. You're all in your own Hollywood Square. Some of you are old enough to actually remember what Hollywood Squares were on TV. But you're in your own square. You are invited to turn on your camera. It's more fun if more people have their cameras on to join. If you're up for it, we do not care if you have a bad hair day or any of that kind of stuff. And you are welcome to chat in the chat. You're welcome to cross chat. You're welcome to say anything you want to anybody you want. And welcome to raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom if you want to participate, or if you want to time it and just unmute and interrupt, you're invited to do that as well. This is hosted by First Watch and our partners at Prodigy. And we've got one expert guest here with us today, and the other one hopefully will be able to join here soon. I know she is flying jet fighters today, so there's always a chance that may have delayed her ability to join us. But hopefully she'll sign in whenever she lands and is available. So before we get started, I want to introduce my co-host, Rob Lawrence. Say hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob, and I'm very interested in this session, Mike. Obviously, the word military appears in here somewhere, and for those that don't know, I'm a graduate of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and was a British Army officer. So I can't wait to have this discussion.
That sounds wonderful. And my guest expert, one of two for today, if the other one is able to join, is Dr. Remley Crow from ESO. Remley, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell folks kind of who you are.
Sure. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. I am Remley Crow. I am the Director of Clinical and Operational Research at ESO, which just means I get to wear two hats that blend my two passions, which are performance improvement and research, which is kind of a long-winded saying, a long-winded way of saying that I'm a huge numbers nerd. Yeah.
Perfect. And if she's able to join us, Commander Cassidi Butch Reese, commander of the Dust Devils Air Test and Evaluation Squadron, hopefully will be joining us. She sent an email last night that said she would be here, but was flying beforehand. So you never know with military aircraft and those kinds of things if something may have gotten her hooked up. But we also have Rob's military experience to tap into here, so that the topic we were going to focus on today is leadership. And one of the things that's been fascinating to me, Dr. Crow, is I have watched your career up close for the last several years. You have kind of done a meteoric rise to one of the top leaders and influencers in the EMS industry, and I have watched dozens, if not hundreds, of the leading and most influential physicians in our industry defer to you and your knowledge and perspective. So when you think about the term leadership, what does leadership mean to you?
That's a great question. I think leadership comes in a lot of different forms, and the form of leadership that we're seeing right now that is effective is the servant leadership aspect. So this notion of working together, removing barriers and enabling others to do great things, I think is true leadership. And there's a difference between being a boss and being a leader, and we can dig into some of those things. But for me, it's really the ability to get rid of barriers and to empower others.
Nice. And any of you who have got thoughts or comments, actually, if you want, open up your chat and just type in a quick introduction of who you are and what you think the keys to effective leadership are. Rob, what are your thoughts on what does leadership mean to you?
So it is exactly what Remley said, first of all, and certainly my background, as I say, I went to Sandhurst, which is the British Royal Military Academy. Its motto is serve to lead. And so servant leadership, firstly, is the clue, and the fact that you are there to support those that are going to win the battle or achieve the aim or keep the mission going for you. So that's point one. But can I just do a quick myth busting session? I know, Remley, you love a myth busting
Oh,
session.
but do I get to put on my beret?
Please, yeah, please do. You've got one of those virtual berets, I'm sure, in your Zoom.
But the real
props.
question is red or
Oh, there we are. And I'm not ready to do a screen grab of that. But so Remley, myth busting. So one of the misconceptions, I think, Mike, before we get into leadership in general, we were talking about, the military, how the military can affect the way we think about civilian leadership. And some people think that military is a do as I say, not as I do, ordered tick-tock, left, right. Everything has to be, done in that way. And actually, my contention, and it always has been, is that the way that the military operates now is that you are trained to think, first of all. It's a cerebral activity. And whether it's actually getting inside your opposition's decision action cycle, if you can think faster than them, you will win. Versus the way that you train your subordinates. And so it comes back to this servant leadership thing. And way back when, would you believe, the German army came up with a process called Auftragstaktik, which actually trains people how to think. If I can train you to think in terms of achieving the aim, in terms of taking the initiative, in terms of if you see the objective, actually you can, and I trust you, you can move on to be successful and take the objective, versus the kind of traditional way we think about the military is, I want you to do 10 steps and then stop because I haven't given you any further instructions. In other words, I'm training you how to be an innovative leader. And of course, the first thing is the training. And then from the training comes the trust. And so to be a good servant leader, I need to train you. We all need to trust each other. And that way we will be very, very successful, because I'm not spending all of my time then micromanaging individuals in order to do a job. And so it's about training and trust. And that's the thing that the military is actually really, really good at. From the German Auftragstaktik theory came the NATO doctrine of mission command. Again, it's about trust, it's about training, it's about analyzing, it's about assessing, and it's about empowering people to be the best at what they do. And I think those things actually are, and while we don't think of those as military traits, and of course in our civilian life now, we have mission statements, we have objectives. Actually, mission statements came right out of the military, because the mission is to advance to Hill 1, 2, 3, 4 in order to defeat the enemy or whatever. And so again, those things have been kind of copied. But I think I would implore people to get out of the mindset that military is a very tick-tock ordained system. It's actually a system about empowering thinkers to think, and then training their subordinates to lead and think and succeed. So those are my opening thoughts, Mike.
I love that perspective, because in the EMS, fire, law enforcement world, we use kind of a quasi-military structure. We have rank, we have collar brass, we have positions, and I think many leaders in the EMS world think they're maybe employing some military style leadership where they might not be using what the actual military uses. And your conversation about trust reminds me, Dr. Crow and I have been part of the leadership team for the collaborative working to reduce the use of lights and sirens across the country. And this issue of, do we trust providers to make the decision as to whether or not to use lights and sirens, both for response and for transport. And there's been a lot of debate around how that works. And initially, when the project first started, there was we come up with change concepts that systems can use to reduce their use of lights and siren, therefore improving safety for their providers, their patients, and their community. And it was thought, we need to hard code the use of licensed sirens into the clinical protocols exactly the same way you would hard code the use of droperidol or ketamine or Levophed or medications with really clear indications, contraindications, and whatnot. And actually, one of the leaders of the project, along with Dr. Crow and I, Dr. Kupas, who's been thinking about this stuff for decades, was a pretty strong advocate that there needs to be more flexibility in decision making for frontline providers on the use of licensed siren than there would be necessarily for some of the medications we use, because there's other factors to take into account. Remley, any thoughts on that? How do you provide trust but guidance?
Yeah, I think this is again a piece borrowed from the military, and so I'm sure Rob can chime in. I don't have military experience, but I am really good at R&D, ripping off and duplicating. So one of the things that we read a lot about, and that I've seen and definitely plays in my role at ESO, is this notion of commander's intent. So Rob mentioned, we can't micromanage every single circumstance, or you can't write the protocol that's going to tell you exactly what to do under each circumstance. But what you can do as a leader or a commander is let your intent be known, the why behind we do something. So if we know that we are trying to reduce lights and siren use to keep our community and our patients and our providers safer, then that's the intent. And now we know that the intent is also to provide timely care at the right time in the right place. So if there is the situation where you're debating whether or not it makes sense to use lights and siren, if you have that as your guiding intent, it'll be a lot easier to make the decision of, do I need to flip the switch, yes or no?
Remley, I agree with that. And commander's intent back in the day used to be called a summary of execution. In other words, you give all of your instructions, but at the end of the day, because I'm the leader or because you're the leader, there has to be that moment where I put the book down and I look you all in the eye and I say to you, okay, guys, this is what we're about to go out and achieve. And I explain to you the plan, because I'm then showing you that I have confidence in the plan. I have confidence in you, and I'm now empowering you to go out and do it. So that's commander's intent. That summary of execution in terms of whatever you're going to do is absolutely key. And obviously you are then using that commander's intent to support the mission that you have defined that you're going out to achieve. So I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I think the opposite of that has those unintended consequences, or what we call the balancing measures, right, Mike? Around, if you try to prescribe for every situation and have control over it, there's going to be some resistance to that. And then this process of malicious compliance of, well, I did exactly what you told me to do, but it's not what they should have been doing.
Malicious compliance, that's a crazy concept.
I love it.
I see Commander Reese is here.
Commander Reese has joined us here.
I'm
just in time as I was
Remley,
making up stuff.
This element of the conversation that, again, von Moltke, who was the chief of the Imperial German Staff, quite rightly said, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And you can translate that into anything that you do, whether it's an MCI, whether it's some sort of major event, that no matter what your bits of paper say, something is going to happen that's different. And therefore you need to have the trust, the training, the cooperation, the coordination of the people that working with you and around you to actually be able to take that initiative and to carry on. So that's my first name drop from von Moltke. Commander Reese, welcome.
I like that. So let's bring Commander Cassidi Reese. Would you to take a second, introduce yourself to the crew that's assembled here?
Certainly. First off, my apologies for being late. I was actually flying. Had to fill in at a last minute. Unfortunately, we ended up doing some on-deck troubleshooting, but got airborne, got our test done, and just made it back. So
what did you fly today?
I flew F-18 Delta Legacy F-18, and yeah, that's what I do for a living, I guess you could say. I'm a F-18 weapons systems officer, so I fly in the backseat, and I'm currently based in China Lake, California, which is in the beautiful and warm Mojave Desert, and I've been doing that. Well, I've been in the Navy for like 18 years now, so that's me in a nutshell.
And tell us a little bit about your current command. What do you do that you can say in public that's not top secret?
Yes, of course. So I'm the commanding officer of Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 31, or VX-31 as we're also called. And we do weapon systems integration and software testing for all F-18s, A through F, and the EA-18G Growler. We also have some older platforms like AV-8B Harriers, in the squadron, for which we do developmental flight test. And curiously enough, we have 3 helicopters, 3 MH-60 Sierras that are assigned to the squadron for search and rescue. It's probably one of our more dangerous missions, curiously enough, from the Sierra Nevada mountain range, Mount Whitney out to Death Valley. So pretty much covering that whole expanse of Eastern California and Western Nevada.
That's wonderful. Can you, one of the first questions we ask is kind of what does leadership mean to you? And one of the reasons we were excited to have you is that in the paramedic, EMS, fire department, law enforcement worlds, we tend to use quasi-military leadership style, but we don't necessarily get plugged into the actual military and how leadership works. So can you maybe just share with us some of your thoughts on what leadership means, and maybe some thoughts about how do you know if you're being effective as a leader or not?
Absolutely. I think those are great questions. I think sometimes, in hierarchical structures like the military, people have an idea of what leadership is, which is, it is associated with your rank and maybe nothing more, which is one form of leadership power, to be sure. And the structure of the organization certainly lends itself to that. But I think leadership is a lot more than just, what rank you wear or what position you hold. It's looking out for your people and making sure their needs are met so that the team can be most effective in accomplishing its mission. Because if people are worried about individual things, or if somebody's not getting their full paycheck or their full allotment or something, they're not going to be as effective contributing to the mission. So making sure your folks are taken care of, and then you can go execute the mission appropriately. And sometimes those two things can be at odds, which they frequently are in the Navy when you look at things like long deployments and whatnot. So you got to figure out how to motivate your folks sometimes when you're, month 6 of cruise and you just got extended 3 more months and you're going to be away from your family. And how do you motivate people in those kind of troughs of experience? And I think that's what good leaders do, is they're able to push the team through those troughs and make sure we're still accomplishing the mission and on board.
That's great. And what we were talking about when you jumped in relates to the concept of trusting your people. And I know you have flown a number of combat missions, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And at the beginning, when you're sent out on a mission, I would presume that you're given a goal and an objective to accomplish, but things probably change in the reality of the mission. So how does the military think about, like giving people an objective, but then trusting them to be able to adjust real time to whatever circumstances they deal with to accomplish things? How does that work?
Great question. I think it varies by what you do and kind of what level of trust you have earned. Yes, certain aspects of the military are probably a little more autonomous than others. I think naval aviation is, particularly strike fighter aviation, so your F-18s and whatnot, are probably given more autonomy because we've gone through extensive training, from flight school just to be able to fly, and then employ the aircraft. And you need certain mission qualifications. You need to obtain those, before you're going to be trusted to go by yourself on a combat mission or to execute, a complicated test or something kind of on your own, if you will. And that trust gets earned over time, and you build up your credentials over time, and then you're entrusted to go do those things and execute. We call it using good headwork and best judgment. So even if what you're going to do might diverge from an aircraft manual or a tactical recommendation or something like that, we always say our aircraft manual itself, like how to fly the airplane, is no substitute for and does not trump good judgment and using your own head to think through the problems. So that's kind of where you have to earn it. I don't know. I'm not in the infantry. I'm not a ground marine or a infantry soldier or something. I suspect there might be varying levels of autonomy in jobs that are maybe more supervised, maybe younger folks, maybe less experienced folks, stuff like that.
Mike, let me segue on to
Sounds good.
that, if I may. And actually, from a ground army perspective.
Actually, Rob, real quick, we have a question from Rochelle Therese, who is a longtime friend of mine with 34 years of military background. So, Rochelle, would you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, did I unmute correctly?
You did. I can hear you.
All righty. It's really not a question, more of a comment about technology. Technology has really taken away the individual soldier's ability to think for themselves. They always feel they need to check in with somebody else, or the boss has made it where they want to know about everything else, and the technology has made it to where that can happen. And then to segue onto that, there's trust, but you also have to, if something does go wrong, accountability at the leadership level, I find, has gone down. If public opinion goes in a certain direction, they're no longer defending their soldier. They're listening to what the public is saying. I was a fire chief for 3 years on our volunteer department. And I used to always tell our guys, I'm not going to be with you all the time, but if whatever you're about to do, you're okay being on the 10 o'clock news, then I'm probably going to defend you. If you're not, then we probably need to have a discussion. But I think technology has severely hampered the military's ability to have soldiers that can think on their own. That was all I want to say.
Thank you. Commander Reese, any response, or Rob or Remley?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think, the Navy has kind of always been more of an autonomous force, just historically, with how difficult it was to communicate with ships at sea. So, you look back to like the days of sail, and, a ship's captain gets kind of broad orders about what they're going to go do, and then they are entrusted to go execute that for better or worse in some cases. So I think in the Navy, we still kind of have that slightly more autonomous mindset, although I will agree that yes, communication and technology can put you maybe too in touch, where you're expected to, and I think it depends a lot on your senior leadership. How much information do they want to be fed, or how often do they expect to check in? I just recently told the folks in my squadron, you don't have to tell me, you don't have to text me when our last plane is safe on deck for the day. Some COs want that. They want to know that all their aircraft are safe on deck. I said, no news is good news. So unless something happens, you don't need to give me a call. So I think it can vary, but I definitely do appreciate that perspective as well.
That sounds good. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, some interesting comments. And first of all, again, the British Army adage is now that tactics is no longer the opinion of the senior officer present. In other words, if you can see a way and find a way, then you have the trust of the organization to get on and do it. Now, that said, of course, I hear what people are saying about accountability. And I always, as a British Army officer, we used to chuckle when the Americans would show up, because they always had someone you jokingly called the FOB, and we couldn't work out what FOB stood for until we realized it was focus of blame. And so if something went terribly wrong, then there would be somebody who was going to get the finger pointed at them. And of course, that was an interesting concept. But I think at the moment, if we look at what a future war is going to look like, and what I mean by that, I mean Ukraine, is that we're going backwards in terms of the only way to patrol the ground is to dominate it. The only way to hold the ground is to dominate it with people. And therefore, leadership must surely be coming to the fore there, despite the technology, despite the advanced weaponry, despite all the things that are going on. It's small groups of people, small groups of operators, whatever you want to call them, having to be trusted, trained, and take the initiative in order to do what they do. And so I think at its most basic level, whether it's soldiering, whether it's firefighting, whether it's EMS, it's actually the individual junior leader that's going to win the day for us. And I think that's fair to say in both military and in EMS and also in public safety.
Sounds good. Dr. Crow, I'm curious, when you think about leading, you know, dozens of groups of physicians and paramedics through research projects, where, you know, you might not be in a position to have official rank, if you will, but you're still dealing with a lot of the similar dynamics about here's the mission, here's how you adjust. Any thoughts about how you apply this without positional authority?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question with a lot of different pieces to it. So for me in a research project, it's interesting because there's not necessarily, like, there is a primary investigator, and yes, that person ultimately has the ability to decline or to accept a suggested edit. But I think that there's some technical expertise that person relies on, that often the methodologist or the statistician has. Then there's clinical expertise that maybe you have a frontline paramedic on a research paper. So everybody's bringing something to the puzzle. And then, you know, in terms of how do you exert influence if you think you're going in the wrong direction? There's a couple of different ways that I have tended to do this, but a lot of it has to do with leaning back on guidelines and kind of what would be an SOP in a lot of places. What's your standard operating procedure? But for me, you know, I go to the journal author guidelines and I say, look, here's the things that we have to hit. Here's some areas where I think we're at risk, and here are some things I think we can do about it. But ultimately, it does lie with the primary author to make those decisions.
And so when I listen to you, and I've watched you do this with a number of different groups, are there like core values or core principles that kind of guide your interactions and leadership as you take people through those kinds of things?
There's definitely some important core values, and I think one of them is authenticity. And that leaving your ego at the door. I have learned from every single research project I've been on, and I have never done a research project alone. You'll never see my name just published by itself, because you really do benefit from having other perspectives and having other people who are willing to give you feedback. So in my mind, feedback is really a gift. It's hard to get those comments from reviewer number 2 sometimes telling you that your paper's awful. Why would you even think about doing that? But at the end of the day, that's actually really valuable information and can get you to be a more effective communicator. I'll say the worst feedback I ever get is when you get the red pen, "Great job!" exclamation point. Like, oh, that tells me you didn't care enough to give me any feedback to make it even better. So I, you know, when I'm being an editor or a reviewer, I try to do that in a way that's constructive and in a way that shows that I actually care about what's going on in the project.
That sounds great. Commander Reese, I know that the Navy has core values and core attributes. Can you share a little bit about kind of how those guide your approach to leadership?
Certainly. So the Navy core values are honor, courage, commitment, which are pretty broad, and you know we could probably talk about those for a while. My command philosophy, I distilled that down to a few different things, which are hopefully applicable here. But honesty, professionalism, and trust, and then kind of underpinning all that is balance. And this is a short command, so I want to make sure folks have a good work-life balance. They're not sprinting. You know, we got to be able. We're in it. We're in it for the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So, but honesty, professionalism, and trust are kind of my 3 guiding values or principles that I reflect on for command. Being honest with ourselves and our own abilities, and when we're about to exceed those, especially, is important, in developmental flight tests. And then being honest brokers, because a lot of times, we have to give our opinion about systems under development or test, and some people don't like, we call it, calling somebody's baby ugly. They might get a little defensive. We see that a lot with the people that are paying us to do what we do, but nevertheless. and professionalism. I work with a great cadre of professional. Most of my officers here are graduates from Test Pilot School or other advanced courses. So I'm very fortunate to have a very high level of professionalism, and my SAR pilots here as well. They go through some pretty rigorous training to do the type of flying that they do at very high altitudes in the mountains, kind of not your standard helicopter flying. And then trust, and I tell folks when they check in, hey, you've by virtue of your first fleet tour, your tactical quals, your advanced education, I'm going to trust you with certain things, and then over time you're going to build up more trust, and that I will keep that trust in you for as long as you maintain that, and if something happens and that trust is broken, then we'll talk about how we're going to rebuild it. So that's kind of what I use, and I agree very much with Dr. Crow's point there, and the earlier point that somebody made about leadership is collaborative, and I think it has to be. I think you can't. I mean, you could just be very authoritative and directive, but I don't think you'd end up with a lot of folks following you after a while.
So I got two quick questions, and then Rob has got something I'm going to jump in on. But one, I'm curious about the process of rebuilding trust, because that's been a curiosity of mine for a long time. About is it possible to rebuild trust, or do you have to rebuild a new one? And then I've got another question about the balance concepts. But any thoughts on rebuilding trust? How's that work?
It's a great question. I'm actually working through that with one of my folks right now, and I think it's kind of day in, day out. Do you first off, I think to rebuild trust, if trust was broken, there was probably an incident that caused it to be broken. So if that's the case, you got to own up to your actions and take responsibility and not make excuses. And that's kind of, for me, that's step one. We're still kind of working through that with one of my folks right now. Just take responsibility, don't make excuses, and then move forward. And then day in and day out, do your job, do your job well, and raise issues if there are legitimate issues going on with your job. But don't be the person in the break room who's backbiting, or oh man, this place is horrible and I hate it here, and that's not going to be a way to rebuild trust. So look for opportunities to step up and help out where you can, and then do your job well, and don't complain. And I think over time that slowly does rebuild that trust. It's certainly not an instantaneous thing, but it has to start with owning up to taking responsibility for the actions that precipitated that break in trust.
That sounds like a good recipe to me. The concept of balance is one that we struggle with in the EMS and fire service and law enforcement world, and that especially in this era of COVID and other contributors to staffing issues. Balance is a challenge, and I'm curious about the concept of balance when you're in a peacetime military versus is there a possibility of taking the concept of balance into an actual wartime conflict kind of situation? How does that work?
I think that's a lot harder, and I'll certainly defer to the other military folks who probably have seen some conflicts or combat as well. I think on my cruises, for example, that concept does pretty much go out the window. And when I say cruise, I don't mean Carnival. It's going out on an aircraft carrier, and those are generally from 6 to 10 months or somewhere in there. And it's kind of understood that when you're underway, when you're on deployment, when you're on cruise, if you need to work a 12, 14, 16, 18-hour day, you're going to get the job done, and that comes first and foremost. So in my experience, I have not really seen that concept of balance. However, even when we're underway in a combat cruise, which all my experience is in the Middle East. So this is not, a super high end conflict. This is a much more low intensity conflict, but for the air at least. We still pull into port. We still have, 3-4 day port call, maybe once a month or every other month. Folks on COVID didn't get those, which was, I think, made crews even more challenging. And, the Navy does try. We have things we call Steel Beach picnics. So if you're underway for, I can't remember if it's 30 days or 60 days consecutively. I think every 30-day period that you're underway, if you don't have a port call, you get one free beer. They'll generally grill burgers and hot dogs up on the flight deck and do what they can to kind of keep morale up. But I think so institutionally, I think it's really hard to find that balance, but I think individually, you gotta find ways, whether, in my case, I'd go work out, which the gyms are small and that's a whole nother experience, but, go try to work out or just kind of do something to get your mind away from the job.
That's great. Thank you. Rob, we're talking something about the Sandhurst leadership principles and qualities of a leader.
Yeah, but first of all, I just want to go back to Commander Reese and say that's why the Americans always love working with the Brits, because we take the bar on operations. Been there, done that, right? So just talking about qualities of leadership for a second, and obviously when Commander Cassidi was talking about the qualities that she expects and she exudes, it took me back. And if you've ever worked with me in any organization, I have 6 principles, which are actually the Commandant of the Royal Military Academy's 6 principles, and they are pride, integrity, learning, humor, service, courage. Let me explain them. So those 6 principles are the way that I certainly live my life by, and I expect others to try to emulate if they can. Pride, be proud of what you do, be proud of yourself, be proud of your people. Integrity is absolute. In everything you do, you have to be the doyen of integrity. Learning, there is never a day where you don't learn a thing, whether it's academically, whether it's life, whether it's a lesson. So pride, integrity, learning. Humor, the ability, and I know I'm your comedy foil, Mike, but humor, the ability to laugh at yourself and with others. Notice I didn't say at others, at yourself and with others. Service, absolute. Like the military, EMS, public safety is not a job, it's a way of life, and therefore we live our life as a service. And finally, courage. Courage has 2 parts. There's physical courage, which is the strength you need to do the job. And then more importantly, there's moral courage. And that's the ability to say no when something is wrong. So, and those 6 points, I've left posters and stickers all over the place in both my military and civilian career, but I give it to you: pride, integrity, learning, humor, service, and courage.
I really appreciate that list, and as I listen to it, Dr. Crow, I wonder, in particular on the moral and ethical issues that you introduced at the end. It seems like the world of research and improvement science is fraught with opportunities to do things that may violate morals or ethics from that perspective. And how do you lead people who are well-intentioned but are likely to head down a path that introduces some, whether it's racism or sexism or any one of those other kinds of things into a research or an improvement project?
Yeah, I think that is a really important piece of research, this concept of, not doing any harm. And everybody who's heard of research has probably heard of an institutional review board, and IRB, and the IRBs exist for a reason. It's as much as, complain about my annual ethics training and I have to sit through a class, there's a really important reason why I have to sit through those classes, because of the things that happened with Tuskegee. And if you don't know these stories, they're worth looking up, about how we did some really horrible things in the name of research. So there's that checks and balance with an IRB, but we know that there's still other ways of twisting the data or torturing the data into saying what you want it to say, or perhaps just asking a good research question, but with the wrong data set that's likely to get you a biased answer. And another risk that's out there is this concept of a weapon of mass destruction. So when we're using biased data, when we know that we have disparities and inequities in our data, and we build models that exacerbate those. So if we find out that Black patients are less likely to get analgesia, and I'm building a model that predicts who needs analgesia, it's going to come out with, oh, well, you'll be less likely to give a Black patient analgesia. Now, that's not a responsible thing to do in research. So we're constantly sitting there and questioning, and the peer review process helps with this as well, but constantly questioning, where are the potential sources of bias in my research, and how can I reduce or eliminate those?
Love that.
Weapons of Math Destruction is going in the next tweet, by the way. Remember.
Oh, that's a book. That's a book by Kathy O'Neill. Highly recommend reading it. I did not coin that phrase.
It's great. And Commander Reese, do you end up in situations where morality and ethics are part of the decision making and leadership process?
Absolutely. And I think you'll find that, pretty much whenever you lead people. Again, going through some interesting times right now in my command, where we're trying to figure out, we had a process that wasn't perhaps followed as well as it should have been in regards to personnel issue. So now as we move forward, it's kind of we're not going to go back to the process and try to fix what we did wrong. So how do we move forward from here ethically and in accordance with, service guidance that we're kind of maybe in a gray area right now. And then just, kind of like I said earlier, we on the flight test side, we will end up calling a lot of babies ugly, and some people don't like to hear that, but I think that's part of being an honest professional is, hey, the piece of gear you gave me, I know it's really going to disrupt your program if I tell you there's all these things wrong with it, but I'm looking out for my brothers and sisters in the fleet who are going to be using this piece of equipment, perhaps in combat someday, and their interests and needs are going to trump, a program manager's schedule or cost chart that they got to stick with. So yeah, I think you're definitely going to run into those dilemmas.
Absolutely. Well, I've got kind of two last questions that I'll ask the group here. The first one is for the young aspiring leaders who are in this circle here. And we'll start with you, Commander Reese, if you'd share with us, how did you get to where you are? A little bit of what was your path to leadership and any influences from that perspective, and then curious about what do you see as next in your own leadership journey, as far as whether it's attributes or positions you're shooting for yourself.
I mean, I could give you the, my path to leadership. I could say, oh, I did this job, this job. But I think what is more important is the mentors that I've had along the way. And I think that is key, like finding a good mentor in your field that you get along with, you can go to for questions, concerns. Hey, I'm thinking about a couple options with where I want to go career-wise. What do you think? What, based on your experience? And I think having good mentorship, and I've had about 2 or 3 like pretty close mentors in my career, and I think that is key to developing into leadership positions. I see those leadership traits that they exhibited when I was in their commands, and it's like, wow, that's what I want to be when I grow up. So seeking out those mentors and helping, having them help you develop as a leader, I think is critically important. And then, where do I see myself going? Probably, in the strict sense of it, probably staying in the Navy for a bit longer. I don't really see myself getting out, but I also want to develop into one of those people that are sought out as mentors and help my folks along and kind of, give them the gouge that I was given about, hey, how do you navigate this Navy personnel system or, this flight test community and kind of bring them along. Because I had the opportunity to do my first flight test tour and then go back to the fleet for 2 tours before I came back to flight test, and kind of mentoring folks that were outside of the flight test community, but still in the Navy and weren't familiar with that. So being able to bring those folks along into flight test and then seeing them go back out to the fleet and do the same thing. I think that is truly rewarding, and that's kind of where I see myself going leadership wise.
Love it. Love it. Dr. Crow, what do you think?
So for me, some things related, I don't know that I chose to be a leader. I think it kind of shows me in a lot of ways. I set out to do one thing, and that was, use data in a meaningful way to help drive EMS forward. So when I was a volunteer EMT in Mexico City and I was an instructor, I realized a lot of what we're doing is our best guess for sure. And it seems like really smart people thought this up, but how can we use data to really show that this is what we should be doing? And there might be some surprises in the data. So I set out to get really, really good at understanding things like study design and statistics, because these are methods that you can extrapolate really anywhere. So I always like to acquire transferable skills and not get myself into just one little niche. And that worked out really well for me. A thing that I've learned along the way, as I've moved into some of these different positions, is to not be afraid to ask for it. I think that I've in the past been afraid of the word no, but the more that I've got my courage up and just ask for something, often I'll get somewhere I didn't think was possible. So that's a huge deal for me. And then in terms of where I think I'm going or what I do, I was just telling somebody this morning, actually, I'm at my dream job because I created it. There was no research department at ESO. I got to kind of build this job and choose my own adventure, and I'm still choosing the adventure, and I really like that. I am at a point where I'm not so much doing each study or having to have the control on it. I get to do a little bit more of that. Here's our intent. Let's see if we can answer this research question and help guide along the way. And I find I was just tallying publications and some other metrics this morning, and I see we can accomplish a lot more as we bring more people into the fold and more paramedics into the fold. I can tell a story of the last research forum that was fascinating to me, because I wanted to look at analgesia, and I wanted to pick 7 for the score of where severe pain is on a 0 to 10 scale. And the medic who was on my group looked at me, he goes, 6. And I'm like, no, 7. 7's the number. The research says 7. 7's the number. He's like, 6. I'm like, why? And he's like, because the FACES scale is the first thing you see in the software, and it goes 2, 4, 6, and he picks 6 for everything. So I like I said, always learning and just being humble in that regard, I think gets you really far.
Love that. Love that. Rob, how did you what was your path to leadership, and what's next in your
well,
broad
first of all, let me
interest?
tell you how I got here. And actually, he's on this broadcast. Jerry Overton brought me over from the UK, where I was the Chief Operating Officer of the East of England Ambulance Service. I'll let him put in the notes or tell you whether that was a good hire or a bad hire, first of all, Jerry. I both thank and blame him in equal measures. No, I don't. I thank him completely. But I agree with the mentorship comments we've had so far. There are some great people in my development and my life, Jerry, obviously one of them, that help you develop and therefore help you along the way as you go. Interestingly, I've just finished doing some prep work on this year's EMS Fitch Lexipol EMS1 survey. One of the big issues is around training, and therefore clearly is around mentorship. And I firmly believe, and I've actually written this up, and it will come up when it's published in a week or two's time, that we are guilty of creating people that we over promote. In other words, we create the Peter principle, where we promote somebody to a level of incompetence, and then we wonder why they fail. And the reason why they fail is because we're not mentoring them and training them. And so that's something that the survey will bring out this year, something that certainly I've mentioned and something that we all need to pay attention to. Where am I going? Well, I've gone from being the Chief Operating Officer to being the guy that does the politics, the legislation, and the promotion of our industry now. And I love doing this job because it gives us a chance to let other people know what we're doing, gives us a chance to try and affect laws, gives us a chance to try and influence people in order to make our day better. And that's really what I want to do. And again, serving to lead, from my perspective, is my future is actually now getting the next generation ready to carry on, because Mike, you and I aren't getting any younger.
Very true. And actually, I will start with my last question with you, Rob, and work our way back to Commander Reese. The last question is, any advice for leaders today as we continue to live in turbulent times of pandemics? The call I was on before this was on the monkeypox outbreak. The BA.5 is the dominant infectious variant in COVID in the US right now. People are not coming to join the EMS world or healthcare industry in droves. Staffing continues to be an issue. We're still kind of mixed up on reimbursement. There's a lot of churn in our world right now. And what advice do you have for leaders for taking care of yourself and being effective in your role as a leader?
Well, you just elegantly described my average week there, Mike, and the issues that you have to deal with, first of all. So that's the first thing first. I think without being too crude, at the moment, you know, we're all in EMS, in public service, we're always in the crap. It's only the depth that varies, right? And so right at the moment, we're in the deep depths. And so as leaders, we have to be able to deal with the pastoral care that Commander Cassidi mentioned earlier on, look after our people, and also look after ourselves. And obviously that's something that you are a master at. But you know, believe that there is a light at the end of this tunnel, as opposed to the train coming the other way, and be positive in everything that you're doing, because your subordinates, your employees, your staff, your work fellows will bleed off your energy, will take your energy, will see your energy and take it away with them. So as a leader, please be positive, but also look after yourself.
That sounds good. Dr. Crow, same question to you. What advice would you give for folks in these turbulent times to take care of yourself and be effective in your role as a leader?
For me, it comes down to sort of challenging your own ideas. So taking a systems thinking to this for me has been really helpful, and not taking things personally, but you know that good people and bad systems are going to have bad results no matter what. So thinking through what are the things in the system that I could change to get different results. And so we all have heard the saying, you know, when you point a finger, there's 3 more pointing back at you, but to really think about what are those things that we can change, and being curious about it, because I think we're all smart people, and we'd like to think that we also hire people who are in line with our values and who are smart people. So getting down to asking that question of, well, what is it in the system that's failing them, and how can we change that? And that's not to say that accountability isn't necessary. It absolutely is. But I think a large part of our problems actually come down to some systems issues, and that includes burnout. And Mike knows I could give a whole talk on that. And a lot of you know that as well. But I do think that there are things that organizational leaders can do to really change the results that we're getting that don't have to do with pointing the finger at the person who's suffering from burnout or from stress. So that's my advice, is just take a systems approach and get curious.
Sounds great. So Commander Reese, thoughts on how to take care of yourself and advice to be an effective leader during crazy times?
I'll do the second one first, because it was something one of my key mentors told me. When you move into a leadership role, never miss an opportunity to underreact. And it kind of gets to Rob's point too, of, you know, your organization, your team is going to feed off your energy. And if you're always high strung and you know, you fly off the handle at the first hint of bad news, well, people are going to stop bringing bad news to you because they don't want to be the one to get yelled at. And then you stop really understanding what's going on in your organization. And that probably goes into self-care as well. You know, I mean, if you're always tense and like ready to you know, again, fly off the handle, then that's probably not a good way to go through life. So on the air side, we also say no fast hands in the cockpit. So if you're faced with an emergency or something airborne, take a minute, you know, take stock of the situation and figure where you're at before you start shutting down engines or flipping switches that you can't undo. Another thing we say with emergencies, some older aircraft that you fly have wind up clocks. And we call them 8-day clocks. And you have to wind the clock and set the time, and then it's supposed to keep time for 8 days or whatever. So what's the first step in any airborne emergency? Wind the clock.
Wind the clock.
Take a step back. Take a breath. understand what you got, and you don't, very few emergencies require immediate action. We do have immediate action that we memorize, but unless you're out of control flight or an engine's on fire, most of your other emergencies, you know, you can take a moment, take a breath. And even in those situations, you know, you don't, the wrong input would be oftentimes worse than no input. So take a minute and make sure you understand what's really going on before you react to it.
Love that. Love that. Wrong input may be better than, or worse than no input. And then never miss an opportunity to underreact. I'm likely to contemplate that one for a while. That's really sage advice. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Commander Reese. Thank you, Dr. Crow. Thank you, Rob. And thank you all for being here. And I hope you all have a safe and an enjoyable rest of your summer. Thank you all for being here.